Hi one and all, and my name is Muhammed Hafees, and today I'm with you to teach plant kingdom. So many of you may have found it difficult to draw the life cycles in plant kingdom. So today I'm here to teach you how to draw the life cycles in a simplified manner. So first things first, let's have an overlook at the divisions of the plant kingdom. So basically we have the algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes. I highly recommend you to take down the notes with me so that it becomes easy for you to have a recap before your exams. And then we have the gymnosperms, and then the angiosperms. Now, the algae and bryophytes are predominantly haploid in nature, whereas the other three are diploid. And what do we understand by haploid and diploid? They are the number of chromosomes. If they are the number and it's in a set. Haploid refers to having n and diploid refers to having 2n. Fine. And now let's get into the life cycles. But before I tell this, you have to remember that the life cycle pertains to sexual reproduction. And within sexual reproduction, we have a phenomenon known as the alternation of generation. So, what's alternation of generation? It's actually, as the term indicates, the switching of the plant body from the gametophytic stage to the sporophytic stage or vice versa. And now, what do we understand by gametophyte and a sporophyte? So, gametophyte is basically a structure which is haploid, forms gametes, and formed from spores, whereas sporophytes are diploid. It forms by meiosis, it forms spores, and it's formed from zygote, which itself is formed by the fusion of gametes. So, before I teach you the life cycles of sexual reproduction in algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, etc., let's learn something as a template or standard. So, what is the standard cycle? Let me illustrate. So, let's start with the gametophytic stage. So, the gametophyte, it forms gametes. Am I right? Gametes. Now, the gametes fuse to form zygote, and the zygote in turn forms sporophyte, and the sporophyte forms through meiosis what? Spores, and the spores form gametophyte. So if anyone asks you what's a gametophyte, you can have the definition from this very chart. So see, the gametophyte is formed from spores, and what does they form? They form gametes. And what is it? It's haploid. So gametes are also haploid, and then the zygote through fusion, it forms 2n. When gametes fuse to form zygote, this phenomenon is known as fertilization. Alright, so gametophyte forms gamete through the process of mitosis. So I hope you know what's mitosis and meiosis, but I'll just give you a quick overview. So mitosis. Mitosis is the equational division, whereas the meiosis is reduction division. Now, for your convenience, let's understand it better. See, mitosis. If we have a structure, a diploid structure or a haploid structure, when there is mitosis, there is an equational division. Like from one haploid, you get two haploid structures. And if it's a diploid, then you get two copies, identical copies, 2n, 2n. But coming to meiosis, actually it's a reduction division. For example, let's take a diploid spore, then it divides into two haploid, nn, and then further divides again to form another two products. So through mitosis you have two entities, but through at the end of a meiosis you have four entities. So have you understood? So this is a quick overview about what's mitosis and what's meiosis. You'll learn about this in your subsequent chapters. So with this general introduction, let's move on to the sexual reproduction and the life cycle of algae. So basically, algae is divided on the basis of the pigments into chlorophyceae, phaeophyceae, and rhodophyceae. Am I right? So, but for today's video, I'm just concerned about the life cycle and the sexual reproduction. So, algae, it has a haploid life cycle, right? So, we have to start with the gametophytic phase. See, gametophyte. And now, tell me, what does the gametophyte produce? It produces gametes. Am I right? Gamete. And then they fuse to form zygote. And this is the 2n structure. And the zygote in algae, they don't produce sporophyte. Instead, they undergo meiosis to form spores. And these spores again forms the gametophyte. So, the haploidic generation is predominant and the diploid generation is represented in a meager manner. So, algae is predominantly haploid in nature. And the part above this line marks the haploidic phase and the part below this line marks the diploidic phase. So, isn't it easy to draw the life cycle of algae? Just you have to remember the template cycle. From gametophyte, it produces the gametes, and the gametes further another form zygotes, and zygotes forms the sporophyte. It undergoes meiosis to form spores. So when it comes to algae, the diploidic generation is very meagerly represented, and then the haploid is the predominant structure. So this is all about the life cycle of algae. Another fascinating thing that I would like to share with you is that the divisions of the plant kingdom, like the algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms, and the sexual reproduction associated with it can be easily understood, because this is also in alignment with the evolution. Are you understanding what I'm saying? See, algae, there will be some modifications or some extra thing to the bryophytes, and from bryophytes to pteridophytes there will be further development and so on. So it's all part and parcel of an evolution. So let us move on to the life cycle of bryophytes. Alright, life cycle of bryophytes. So now let us discuss about the life cycle of bryophytes. So as you know, the bryophytes do have two types of structures, which are the liverworts and mosses. Alright, so let us discuss about the life cycle. So before going into the life cycle, I would like to remind you about the template. See, gametophyte forms gametes, and the gametes undergoes fertilization to form zygote, and from zygote you have the sporophyte, and from sporophyte you have spores, and the spores form the gametophyte. Now let us look at the life cycle of bryophytes. So it starts from the haploid phase gametophyte N. It forms the gametes. But here, apart from that, we saw with the algae, it directly forms gametes, right? But in bryophytes, there is an evolutionary advantage. They have the male and female reproductive organs. So the male reproductive organ is the antheridia, and the female reproductive organ is the archegonium. Okay, this is the male reproductive organ and this is the female reproductive organ. And now they form the male gamete, which is the anthrozoid, and the archegonia forms the egg. And now these two undergoes fertilization to form zygote. And now this zygote forms the sporophyte. Alright, now this sporophyte is diploid in structure. And this sporophyte has got something in its capsule, and within the capsule meiosis occurs to form spores, and the spores forms the gametophyte. Isn't it simple? Now do you have a doubt regarding what's a capsule? Okay, let me illustrate. So in the beginning I have told you there are two types of bryophytes, which are the liverworts and the mosses. So regarding the liverworts, they are simple thalloid structures, which means they don't have differentiated body. They have an undifferentiated body with a root like rhizoids, and that's it. All right. But regarding the mosses, they have somewhat root like, stem like and leaf like structures. This is the stem like structure, then we have the leaf like structures, and then we have the root like structures. All right, and this is the gametophyte, right? And the sporophyte actually grows on the gametophyte, and it has got three parts: a foot, a seta, and a capsule. So within the capsule, it undergoes meiosis to form the spores. And once the capsule breaks and dehiscence and it releases the spores, this spores, when it comes in contact with the soil or mud or whatever it may be, then it forms the gametophytes, and thus the cycle continues. All right, and now this spore, it has got two fate, right? If its fate is to become liverworts, then it's direct development. But if it has to become a moss, then what happens is that this spore, right, it divides and then it forms a long branched multicellular structure with buds, and it's also branched. All right, we call this as the protonema stage of moss. All right, and then it advances to the leafy stage, wherein the buds forms the gametophytes. All right, so this is the leafy stage and the protonema stage of moss. And now this is the sexual reproduction within bryophytes, right? So they also have the sexual reproduction, which is through fragmentation and Gemmacups. Gemmacups. So gemmacups are actually the structures which are found on Marchandia. So Marchandia and Riccia are the examples of liverworts. So these are the cups within the Marchandia and it forms the next generation. That's the asexual mode of reproduction. And then we also have fragmentation, right? But what you have to remember is that when fragmentation comes into the moss, it has got two stages, right? The protonema stage and the leafy stage. But fragmentation only takes place in the protonema stage. This you have to remember. Another fascinating thing about bryophytes is that the bryophytes are also called as the amphibians of plant kingdom. Why do you think so? Because they require water medium for their fertilization. So actually the fertilization takes place within the archegonium of bryophytes takes place within archegonium. So here the egg is sedentary or it's non-motile, whereas the androzoid has to swim through the water medium to reach our sedentary egg to form zygote. So that's all about the life cycle of bryophytes.